When I was young, I had my own Home Alone adventure, but mine was not funny. When I was a kid, well, a young teenager, I frequently spent my Saturday nights babysitting my siblings. As the eldest of three, I assumed this responsibility with no pay nor thanks to speak of. It was simply expected of me, one of my contributions to the family. I babysat so frequently because, well, my parents needed it. They'd had marriage problems in the past, and their counselor told them they should go on a weekly date. Revive the magic, rekindle the flame, all that good stuff. Yeah, it sucked to be robbed of a weekend evening, but it wasn't much of a burden. My parents were happier than they'd been in ages, and they both seemed genuinely excited for date night each week. I would have rather been doing other things, of course, but I'd seen my aunt and uncle go through a nasty divorce a few years back, and I desperately wanted my parents to stick together. And so it was that on the night of December 3rd, in the year 2006, I stood at the open front door of my secluded Colorado home, waving goodbye as my parents backed out of the icy driveway. "Drive safe," I called out, steam pouring from my mouth. I don't know if they heard me or not. Wrapping my arms around my torso in response to the wintry mountain air, I entertained myself for a few brief moments by exhaling forcefully and watching my breath float away into nothing. And there was truly nothing around me, not a car or a creature in sight. It wasn't long before I grew bored and turned back into the warm house, nose tingling from the chill. Georgie and Kate were eating their dinner at the kitchen table. As I watched them, I couldn't help feeling like an only child. Georgie, 3 years my junior, was severely autistic and not talkative. He only spoke when he really wanted something, and only then in the simplest of words. Milk and sandwich was code for peanut butter and jelly with the crust cut off, which he was presently devouring. Kate, meanwhile, was still a baby, just shy of 2. The 9-year gap between them is glaring, but to this day my parents swear to me Kate wasn't an accident. Kind of like back in high school when I swore to them I had no idea how those magazines got under my mattress. But I digress. The kids finished dinner and I set them up with their entertainment for the night. Georgie in his room with the PlayStation 2, which was a hot commodity in those days, and Kate in her crib in front of Sesame Street. Myself, I ignited the basement fireplace, dimmed the overheads, and curled up with a book by the light of our Christmas tree. God, that was a nice house. Not a day goes by that I don't miss it. I read in perfect contentment for nearly an hour. Night had fallen by then, and the room had become toasty. I was beginning to doze off when I heard Georgie's heavy footfalls descending the staircase. I sat upright and looked at him expectantly as he waddled into the room. "No more knocking," he said, brow furrowed in annoyance. I shook my head. "I'm not knocking," I said. "Is someone at the door?" Georgie just stared at me blankly. "Georgie," I said more clearly this time, "did someone knock on the door?" "No more knocking," he repeated. "Knocking on window." Knocking on window? I stood up, now wide awake. "Georgie, is someone knocking on your window?" "No more," he replied simply. I stood in silence for a moment, unsure of what to do. It was probably just one of my friends playing a prank, I thought, but being alone in a house that big makes you a little jumpy. My mind started to race through the situation. I was a 13-year-old boy in a nice house on the hilly outskirts of a Colorado mountain town. The streets were engulfed in trees, and there were no homes within a quarter-mile of my own. Our road saw next to no traffic, and the police station was a good 15 minutes away. It was probably my friends, I thought. But what if it wasn't? "Follow me," I told Georgie. Hand trembling slightly, I turned the knob and glanced up the staircase. It was dark up there. The only light came from Kate's room. Kate. I sprinted up the stairs to her room, where she remained happily perched in her crib, squawking with delight as Elmo fiddled with his crayons. I breathed a sigh of relief, but still my heart thumped in my chest. This is silly, I told myself. Be a man. I made my way down the hall to Georgie's room and stood tentatively at its door. Taking a deep breath, I gently pushed the door ajar, reaching for the light switch and thinking better of it. If this was the worst-case scenario, then I didn't want our mystery intruder to know where in the house I was. The only light in the room came from Star Wars Battlefront's game-paused screen. I listened for a moment, but heard nothing. I began to suspect that Georgie had simply imagined the knocking. Somewhat exasperatedly, I moved to the window and flicked up a blind to reveal nothing. Just a landscape of freshly fallen snow backed by a quiet, lonely road. I watched the peaceful night, relieved as the large flakes fell softly to the ground, my eyes trailing an individual fractal all the way to the footprints just beneath the window's frame. At first I did not comprehend them. I just stared, transfixed, at the deep imprints in the snow. Shoes, a man's shoes. None of my friends wore the size, of that I felt sure. I traced them backwards from the window to the sidewalk, from whence this intruder had evidently come. But where did they lead? It was a bright night. The moon shone proudly between the clouds. My eyes followed the steps across the front yard, but once they passed behind the giant pine, they disappeared. My heart leapt to my throat. Whoever had walked behind that tree was still there. In panic, I quickly backed away from the window. Georgie, sensing my fear, began to whimper. No, shh, I muttered, desperate to keep him quiet. I flicked the television off and led Georgie out of the room. I quickly pulled Kate from her crib, powered her TV down as well, and carried her down the stairs in the blackness. Can't see, Georgie said, and Kate began to cry. I shushed her hurriedly as we descended. Once in the basement den, I unplugged the Christmas tree so that the only light in the room came from the embers of the dying fire. I sat Georgie down on the couch and settled Kate in his arms. Sit right here, I directed, staring into his eyes. Don't move, do you understand? Do not move. I need to call the police. I would have called my parents, but this was 10 years ago, and they didn't have cell phones. So I took the stairs quickly and quietly, tiptoeing to the phone hanging from the wall of our living room. I picked up the phone and dialed 911, but I heard nothing. Silence. I slammed it on the receiver and picked it up again. Again. Nothing. I think it was around this point that I started to cry. I couldn't help it. I was scared. I tried to calm myself down, telling myself that the storm had killed the phone line, but there wasn't much of a storm. The snow was steady, sure, but there wasn't even a breeze. Certainly nothing that could have disabled our phone. Tentatively, I walked into Kate's room and peeked out the window. My first glance was toward the tree, of course, where the footprints stopped, but now they continued. Sometime while I was herding my siblings downstairs, whoever was behind the tree had moved. I followed the footsteps across my frozen front yard to a man standing near the driveway. He was looking right at me. My breath stopped. I was frozen in place. This was not one of my friends. I had never seen this man before, but he was looking at me with an eerie blankness. He was wearing a black turtleneck and black slacks, a lone dark spot on a blanket of purest white. My eyes never left him, and his never left me. We stood still, silently staring for what seemed like an eternity. My heart thrummed in my chest, and I felt nauseous. For the first time, gazing into this man's eyes from afar, I began to consider the possibility of my death. I thought of my dad's brother, who was killed in an accident at age 11, forever 11, never growing up, frozen in time in the memories of all who knew him as a soul of eternal youth. At this, the tears flowed freely once more. Please don't hurt us, I begged in a sobbing whisper. I knew he could not hear me, but I could not help myself. Finally, he broke eye contact with me and looked toward the heavens, toward the gently falling snow. He was saying something, but what, I could not hear. I stared, transfixed, as he pulled a handful of dark powder from his pocket. Then, still gazing upward, still muttering to himself, he flung the stuff at his feet. I desperately wanted to run, to get my siblings, but I thought that to let this man out of my sight would be unconscionably foolish. No, better to keep an eye on him. The house was still locked. I had the upper hand, I felt. Besides, I could not bring myself to look away from the strange ritual unfolding before me. The man had removed his sweater and flung it carelessly to the ground behind him. He was no longer staring skyward, but his lips continued to move. I trained my eyes intently upon his mouth, trying with no success to read his words, when I saw something glint in the moonlight. It was a knife, a long, callous blade, which he had removed from his other pocket. It bore dark stains already. From what? I covered my mouth to hush a scream as the man, still muttering to himself, ran the edge of the blade along his pale, distended stomach. A thin red line appeared along his abdomen, and blood of the deepest shade began to dribble from the wound. The streams trickled down his belly and fell ungracefully upon the black powder at his feet. At this, the man stared skyward once more, face contorted in a gruesome smile. He was sobbing uncontrollably, and mucus ran freely from his nostrils, but he looked happy. Beyond happy, elated. My stomach churned in revulsion. This man was in ecstasy. I watched, almost entranced by this bizarre unfolding, when the man's face changed suddenly. He looked directly at me once more, and his eyes appeared unhinged. Still clutching the knife, he began to sprint directly at my window. I took one look at the weapon this man brandished and instinctively fled the room. I slammed the door shut behind me and was halfway down the stairs when I heard the window shatter. The man screamed loudly in pain as I reached the basement. I locked the door behind me and ran to Georgie and Kate. "No more screaming," Georgie pleaded. No more screaming," I agreed in hushed tones, stroking his hair in an effort to calm him down. Kate, meanwhile, seemed happy as a clam. I strained, listening intently. Is he inside the house? I still clung to some naive hope that he had injured himself on the glass and had retreated, or perhaps he had been weakened by his self-inflicted wound. Finally, I heard it, the subtle but unmistakable sound of footsteps upstairs. He was indeed inside the house, and by the sound of it was trying to be quiet. I silently guided Georgie and Kate into a storage closet and closed the door behind us, manipulating the handle to make as little noise as possible. We stayed there for about 5 minutes, listening to the ceiling creak threateningly above us. Then I realized, I don't know why it took me so long, that we were not trapped. We still had a way out. I saw in my mind's eye a window well in the bathroom down the hall, the only access our basement had to the outside world. Almost as if on cue, a frustrated scream echoed from above, followed by a tremendous crash. He had pulled something to the ground, perhaps the entertainment stand or maybe the hutch. "He's here!" the man shrieked hysterically. "How dare you hide from him?" To this day, I don't know who he was talking about. But it was at that moment, the moment I heard him begin to descend the stairs, that I made my move. Holding Kate in one arm and guiding Georgie with the other, we began our flight down the hallway. As we reached the bathroom, I stared fixedly at the window near the ceiling. It would be a tight fit, but we could make it. I flung the window open, stood on the toilet, and placed Kate gently in the shallow window well. Then I stepped off and told Georgie to get on. "Yucky gross, no standing on toilet," he said, looking embarrassed. I heard the man fumble with the locked handle at the base of the stairs. Time was running out. I'm not proud of what I did next, but it was the only way I could think of to get Georgie to cooperate. I smacked my brother roughly across the face and grabbed him by the shirt with both hands. "Georgie, get on the fucking toilet," I snarled at him, the first time I had ever said that word. He began to wail in pain and surprise, but he did step onto the toilet all the same. "Climb out the window," I directed in a harsh tone, and as he grabbed the ledge, I used all the strength I could muster to help push him up. Once he almost slipped back down, almost, but he was stronger than I thought he was, and managed to pull himself back up. With both of my siblings safely in the window well, I climbed on the toilet one last time and gripped the edge of the windowsill. As I clambered out myself, I heard a raucous crash. The man had broken down the basement door. With one last hoist, I pulled my legs up through the window and shut it quietly behind me. As I helped my siblings out of the well, I heard one last anguished shout from the man, muffled through the pane of glass. "Why are you hiding from him?" "Cold!" screamed Georgie as I led him barefoot through the snowy grass. In panic, I shushed him, but it was no use. He and Kate were both crying quite loudly by this point. My only hope was to get them as far away from the house as possible. I heard a distant crash from inside the house, and I quickened our pace. Feet numb, I sprinted through the yard to the sidewalk and practically had to drag Georgie onto it. "Bathroom light on," he said pleadingly. He was obsessive about turning off lights and electronics before leaving, and he was correct. We had left the bathroom light on in our haste. I ignored him and rushed us down the frozen pavement, stepping on sharp rocks and sticks and not even comprehending it. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I didn't know what we were headed toward. All I knew is what we were headed away from. The snow was falling much harder by this point. I could already see it collecting in a pile on Kate's head. Her nose was beet red and dripping with snot. I needed to get her inside. But where? I looked ahead and saw a light, off in the distance. The Garland's house. I'd said maybe a grand total of 6 words to Mr. and Mrs. Garland my entire life, but that was our one option. It was in their house that we would seek refuge. My house was now around the corner and out of sight, but I did not let up the pace until Georgie tripped on something and landed in a dark puddle. "Hey!" he screamed indignantly, looking back at his stumbling block. In the glow of the distant streetlight, I could see Georgie had fallen into blood. A dead man lay, face up and eyes open on the sidewalk. Snow had fallen onto most of him, and he had been mostly invisible until Georgie's feet had connected with his midsection. I remembered the dark stain I had seen on our intruder's knife. "Come on," I pled, wrenching my eyes away from the grisly scene as I pulled Georgie to his feet. We ran for another 60 seconds, maybe, and finally reached the Garland's front door. The window into their parlor was open and a fire was roaring. Mr. and Mrs. Garland sat drinking tea in cozy armchairs. I pounded ferociously on their door. They answered together, utter bewilderment stamped on their faces. I handed Kate to Mrs. Garland and collapsed into tears. The police arrived at my home 15 minutes later and apprehended the man, unconscious, lying in a crumpled heap on the floor of our basement bathroom. They discovered him with a fractured skull, many deep lacerations from the window of Kate's room, and intestines partially protruding from the wound on his gut. He had slipped in his attempt to climb where we had climbed, hit his head, and knocked himself out. Apparently, he confessed under questioning that he was a member of a strange cult. A cult which, as far as anyone can tell, does not even exist. He claimed to have been taking part in a ritual which required the sacrifice of a pure soul. And my autistic brother had been his target that night. My parents have not shared with me all the details of what happened after that night. But as far as I know, our intruder is currently rotting in a cell. The man he killed, the man lying on the sidewalk, was a friend of my father who lived 2 streets over. He had called his wife on his cell phone not long before he died, informing her of a suspicious man dressed in black, stalking around the neighborhood. My parents arrived home from their date to find police swarmed around the block and their home a crime scene. My father relocated at work, and we had moved across the Rockies to Salt Lake City just 2 weeks later. Kate is now a bratty middle schooler. As far as I'm concerned, she's perfect. Georgie, now 21, hasn't changed a bit, but he loses his mind if someone knocks on a window. As for me, I'm a bit of an adrenaline junkie now. I climb mountains with narrow trails and steep ridges. I go cave diving in places where you shouldn't. All, I think, in an attempt to recreate the fearful intensity of that one snowy night long ago. But it never works. The closest I come is when I'm alone, in my room, in the dead of night. Greetings. My name is Nikki. I would like to begin my story by letting the readers and listeners know that this story is 100% true and real. It happened. It scared me. And it changed my perspective on where we go and where we stay after our souls leave our bodies. It has taken days and hours to try and formulate even one sentence as I type and delete everything, processing the events in this story. This is a long story, so bear with me. For purposes of being unidentified, I have changed the names of the people in my story. I am from Cary, North Carolina, and I have recently taken up pet sitting since April to help with school finance and to have a little extra money in my pockets. I love animals dearly, and if I wasn't doing what I am now for work, I would definitely have a job that involved saving an animal's life or rescuing of the sort. I have the biggest heart for animals, more than I do humans, which can be understandable. Since April of 2024, I have grown my clientele tremendously, which gives me a sense of accomplishment. I've practically been all over the eastern side of NC and love every moment of it. I recently took up a job in Cary for a new family that was going on vacation for 5 days. Now, here's a little backstory on the house. The home is very old. I'm talking one of the very first houses built in their location, old. They have, of course, tried to modernize it by adding new appliances and such, but from an outside view, you can tell the house has some character. Nevertheless, I was excited to add one more client to my name and one more fur baby to take care of. I met with the mom, Julia we'll call her, and her husband John, Jenny and youngest son Jake, again fake names, one Tuesday afternoon after work. They have a 3-year-old black lab, which I absolutely love, as my first childhood dog was a black lab. Julia greeted me at the front door with a warm smile and friendly, "Hey girl." I put on my charming customer service voice and stepped through the front door. Immediately upon entering the house, you can feel an overwhelming session of someone watching you. At the time, it was just me, her, and the dog Lily, so I wasn't sure why I was feeling this way, but I ignored it anyway. Julia directed me to the living room, which, as I explained earlier, was very modernized and updated, with the barn-style door separating us from the kitchen. "Please sit," she spoke. "Thank you for inviting me over and letting me meet Lily first. I feel that is best before doing any sort of drop-ins or in-home sitting, so the pets can be comfortable," I said. Her husband John, who had his son that was roughly 3 or 4, sitting on his lap, spoke up. "Of course, we believe that is important too, which is why we wanted to invite you over before we left, so we could give you a layout of the house and let you in on our little secret." My eyebrows instantly furrowed at the mention of a secret. It was off-putting a little, so I wasn't sure exactly how to respond to that. I thought maybe it had something to do with the dog. "John," Julia said, huffing and rolling her eyes at his comment, "I did not want you saying anything openly without us easing into the conversation first," she said, a bit irritated. I spoke up. What are you guys talking about?" I said in a nervous chuckle. Julia turned to face me, eyes drilling into mine with a now hastily noticeable expression change on her face. Everything around us seems to get eerily quiet. Even the baby stopped making his little noises and the dog perked up. "Nikki," she paused, her eyes scanning the carpet to try and find the right words to say. "I wanted to have this conversation with you until we were out of the house because, I don't know, I didn't want it to affect your final decision of staying here with Lily," which at this point of blabbermouth over there, her head nodding in John's direction, "I completely understand if you do not want to move forward." It seemed as though we were taking forever to get to the point of what the heck was going on. So I rushed her. "Okay, well, could you just tell me? Because right now I feel uncomfortable." Her lips parted, and what she said next sent shivers all over my body. "Our home is, well, peculiar. It's very old, and it was built in the 1930s, so it's been around for a while. When we first moved in 2006, the house had been sitting for years. The last person to live here was in 1995, and from what the owner of this land said, they moved out pretty quickly, leaving a lot of stuff behind. Being told this information, we never really paid attention to that, because it really wasn't our concern as to why someone decided to leave, as we all have our reasons for moving along. But I guess I should have paid more attention to what was being told. One evening, me and John came here to repaint the walls and do a little bit of cleaning, as this place was sitting for quite some time. I was in the master bedroom," she said, pointing down the hallway behind her from the living room, "and John was in the kitchen. I was stirring the paint up, and it felt as if someone was watching me. My eyes instantly grew big, as that was the exact feeling I had walking into the house. It felt like it came from everywhere all at once. I saw your face when you walked in, as did everyone else who comes to our home. You just feel something, but you can put your finger on it. Anyway, I just wanted to work on the trim as I was pregnant and ready to pop at any moment. As I was bent down, I could hear faint footsteps coming down the hall. The carpet that was originally here was ripped up because it was old and smelly, so you could hear anyone coming down the hall, even if they were trying to be quiet. I put my brush down and just sat, listening to who I thought was just John coming to check on me, but oddly, doing it to where I couldn't hear him. I got up and peeked my head around the corner of the door and didn't see him. That immediately scared me because I know what I heard. I even stepped out in the hallway. I called his name and he answered me from the kitchen, and I would have definitely heard him scurrying back if he was coming down. I turned back to the room, not even entering the bedroom doorframe, when I saw a figure in the corner of the room. It was like a light mass. It was a woman for sure. I could see the big bouncy hair and soft features, but she wasn't moving, just observing. At this point, I can feel my heart beating faster and faster and my hands getting clammy. I was not expecting this to be told to me, and not even hearing the full story, I wasn't sure if I could commit to this. "Okay, wait," I said, my voice cracking a little bit from the fear that has just now been instilled in me. "Are you telling me that your house is haunted? As in, something is here with you guys and doesn't want to leave, kind of haunted?" I looked back and forth from Julia to John, waiting for confirmation. Yes, that is what I am getting at," Julia said. "I did not want to tell you through Facebook Messenger because I did not think that would be appropriate, but I also did not want to tell you the first thing arriving at our home." Needless to say, I was beyond shocked, but even with the feeling of eyes all around me, I did not feel threatened. It wasn't a dangerous or menacing environment, just weird. After what was supposed to be a quick meetup with the dog and family and house tour, turned into a 2-hour conversation and a lot of convincing and upcharge. I was allowed to invite my boyfriend, who I told as soon as I left, a company besides Lily. I started the job that Friday. I got off work, and what was a very busy, exhausting day, I looked forward to taking a shower and throwing my pajamas on. Replaying in my head all day that I would be residing at a literal haunted house for the next 4 days did play a part in my exhaustion, but I did not want to burden myself constantly thinking about it and worrying. I told myself I would pray upon immediately entering the home, and that I would be in the presence of my boyfriend every step of the way. I got there around 5:45 p.m. and was greeted by a happy Lily, who then ran over to her harness and leash, ready for a walk. Got her suited up, and we did just that. After about a 10-minute walk, we came back and I fed her and did my routine before settling in. My boyfriend got to the house around 7:30 p.m., asking me how things were considering it was just me and Lily. I told him that everything seemed normal and that maybe I was too hyper-focused on waiting for a noise in the house or to see something. We both got settled in, had dinner, and stayed up until neither of us could keep our eyes open. The time was now 9:30 p.m. exactly. I had just let Lily outside lead so that she could use the bathroom one more time. As I was shutting the door to give her a few minutes, my boyfriend yelled my name from the kitchen, startling me a little as the house was completely quiet, with only the faint noise of the TV coming from the master bedroom. I scurried into the kitchen following his panicked and frightened voice and was instantly stopped in my tracks. Not even beyond the barn doors to the kitchen was a figure, a white ghostly silhouette casting its presence just beyond the storage room. To give you a layout, you pull open the barn doors into the kitchen, where you are met with the sink and refrigerator to your left, and pantries and drawers of other things to your right. The island is in the middle. It's a very small kitchen with one way in and one way out. My jaw practically fell to the floor, as did my boyfriend's, as we stood there looking at a freaking ghost. I remember feeling nauseated and scared, but completely enthralled all in one. My hands were shaking so much. I could hear Lily barking like crazy just right out the door, and now that I think about it, I think she knew that we were seeing it. My boyfriend advanced forward, as if he wanted to get closer to it. I grabbed his arm before he could even take another step, telling him to please not move, because I did not want him to leave my side, not even for a millisecond, even if it was to take a step forward. As we are watching this figure grow in shape and size, I glance over to the island, seeing that my phone is laying right on the countertop. Dan, my boyfriend's name for the story, slowly moved forward and grabbed my phone. I need to get a picture. But as if we weren't already thinking the same thing, he was already moving forward to grab it. The entire time I saw this figure, my entire body was trembling. My knees felt weak, and I was contemplating what was real and what was not. "This is insane. It's literally looking right at us," said Dan in a hushed, whispered voice. "I will end my story here. I have always believed in ghosts, good and bad, because if there is good in this world, there is bad." After my time ended at Lily's home, I showed John and Julia the photo we captured, watching as their demeanor of excitement returned home, dropped to a nervous and panicked expression. "Holy shh," John said, slapping his hand over his mouth from letting any more of his expression flow out. "That's her. That is who I saw that night in the master bedroom," Julia said. "But who is she?" I asked. John spoke up. "We have no clue. Eventually, after we kept seeing her so many times, we reached out to the owner of the land. He said that he knew about it but did not want the sale of the house to be determined by a spirit, so he did not say anything. He thinks she's just been roaming the property for years. I feel like I should preface this with, I'm no stranger to the paranormal. It's been a part of my life even before I could form memories. But what happened that night will haunt me forever. I learned a long time ago that there are 3 kinds of paranormal things: those that like humans, those that tolerate us as long as we keep our distance, and those that hate us. This was the last one. About 9 months ago, my girlfriend and I were driving home from visiting her parents, and we had been driving for a little over 5 hours. We only had an hour and a half left when we stopped for gas, and my mother called me. She was worried because it was getting late. I told her where we were, and she recommended a back road that would make the trip only 45. I've lived in Southern Oregon my whole life, so back road shortcuts are nothing new. But I should have been smarter about remembering what lives out here. We decided to take the shortcut. It was fine for the first 15 minutes until we made the turn deep into the woods. Now, anyone who spent any time living in a rural place or just enjoys the outdoors knows that a thick forest is always darker. But this was too dark. We still had maybe an hour of sunlight left, but when we drove deeper into the woods, this was too dark. Not even 100 feet in, and all sunlight was gone in front of us and behind us. But what got our attention first was the chest feeling. We were laughing, blasting music, and cracking jokes the whole trip. But when we got in, it's like we couldn't speak. I tried, and nothing came out for a long time. I felt something inside of my chest, that deep primal feeling our ancestors had when something was stalking them. The eyes on you feeling. That need to be as quiet as possible. The shaky breathing and that gut feeling of, you aren't welcome here, get out. I tried to rationalize it at first, thinking my anxiety was getting the better of me, until my girlfriend grabbed my arm. I looked over, and to this day, I've never seen her so afraid. That look in her eyes of, what's going on, I'm scared. I knew I wasn't crazy. Instinctually, I turned off the music and we drove in silence. Something was not only watching us, but following us. For a moment, my body moved on its own. My girlfriend's hand still on my arm, I realized my hand had moved down to the knife I keep in my car to help me feel safe. It didn't say anything, but it felt like your father giving you that angry stare and saying nothing. But you know you messed up. That's when the lights came. There had been no cars, 0 on this road the whole trip. But then 2 lights appeared behind us, and I don't mean I saw them turn a corner, they just appeared. Now, normally you can tell what kind of a car it is behind you based on the lights. Newer, older, cop car. One of those people who puts the giant searchlights on their truck. But this wasn't that. We both knew it, because there was no vehicle attached to them. For the first time, I was able to squeeze out just a few words. Don't look at it, eyes front, don't acknowledge it. As I said, I'm no stranger to the paranormal, and I firmly believe that our ancestors care about us and try to warn us when they can. It's like those words weren't mine. It's like they were screaming for us to run and get out of these woods. These lights stayed right behind us the whole time. No deviation in distance or brightness, never tried to pass us. No honking even when we slowed down for turns. They just stayed, following us. We drove for what felt like hours. But when I checked my clock, 5 minutes, another feeling of hours passing, 10 minutes, and the darkness didn't allow us to even see past the front row of trees. That's when we made another turn. Trees were in the road, not cut down, snapped. Branches and other planes in the road to where we had to drive around them, all that time the lights staying right there. This kept on until we finally saw our turnout. I put my foot on the gas and hit that turn way harder than I should have. We pulled over and looked back. The lights were gone. We waited, and nothing ever came. There were no turns off the road except the one we just took. The chest feeling wasn't gone, but it was lessened. My girlfriend was on the verge of tears, so I put foot to floor and drove us home when we got there. We tried to hide how shaken we were. My parents didn't notice, but my grandma didn't buy it. She asked us what was wrong as we were going to my room, and I told her. She said she knows that feeling and that she was glad we made it safe. but to stay inside tonight no matter what. The nightmares we had that night were unreal, back in the forest and with that feeling. Again, it said nothing, but it was as if I could feel its thought. Get out, never come back. Some things in this world don't like us, and we shouldn't try to call their bluff. If you get that feeling in your chest, the best thing you can do is get out of that situation, because this isn't the first time I've felt this deep in the woods in Oregon, and I've learned that this is another place that we aren't meant to be. It doesn't matter if we put a road there, we desecrated its home, and I believe driving on that made it even more upset. Now, let's begin. This is not my story, but one of my dad's. I'll call him D for short. And these stories did not happen at the same time. When he was in the military, he lived in a military home for a short amount of time. He lived with 2 other soldiers. This will be important later on. One late night, he and his roommates decided to go to the bar. Their landlord was very strict about turning all the lights off before you leave the house as to not raise the electricity bill, so D and his roommates turned all the lights off and headed out. After going out for some time, they came back to the bathroom light on and the sink running. D brushed it off and never gave it a second thought, but the landlord would not be happy if he found out. The next time anything paranormal happened was when he was cooking dinner for himself. He bent down to grab a pan from the lower cabinet, but when he came back up, he hit his head on the upper cabinet, hard, to the point when he touched his head, he saw blood on his hand. He looked around to see all the upper cabinets open, and those weren't open before. Again, he brushed it off, because he's weird like that. This next one happens often. Sometimes when he would hang out with his friends late at night, they would hear a toddler running in the hallway in that thumpy and clumsy way of theirs. And you guessed it, folks, they brushed it off. This is the last time D had a paranormal experience, and it was while he was packing up his things to leave the military home. He was packing his things when his door slammed shut. He thought that it was the wind and got up to go open it again, but when he pulled on the door, it wouldn't open. Have you ever been playing tag with a friend or a sibling when you were little, and they went in a room and shut the door before you could come in? And you would pull on the door and it would open a little bit before your friend or sibling mustered the strength to shut it again. This is what was happening with D. He would open the door just a little bit and try to peek through the crack and see who it was. But just before he could, it would slam shut again, and D was strong in the military, like strong. So that meant that what was holding the door shut was stronger than him. He tried tugging at it for a couple minutes before stepping back and shouting, "This isn't funny," thinking it was one of the roommates who had come home early from doing something, can't remember what it was, but that's not the point. He tried to open the door after a second, and it opened just as any door would. He looked out only to see nobody there. He looked out his window to see his roommates just now pulling into the driveway. And that's the last time my dad had a paranormal encounter, though. Paranormal encounters kind of run in the family. My grandpa saw a UFO in Minnesota, and my grandma saw Bigfoot. So I can only assume that I'm next. I'm a little scared for when the day comes, but hey, maybe I'll see Mothman. Me and my case manager R have a meeting every week, and a few weeks ago we decided to go to a hiking trail. We took my dog Bear with us. R is 25 and I'm 22, so we get along well. Once we got to the trails, R grabbed her backpack that she had packed some granola bars and water, and off we went. We passed a couple of other people, and Bear wanted to meet everyone. We talked about my progress in case management and how well my grief counseling is going. We both suddenly felt like we were being watched, but we brushed the feeling off and continued with our hike, which we would later regret. R started to talk about haunted trails, which gave me goosebumps, and I jokingly said, "R, do you have to talk about that?" A rabbit ran across the trail in front of us, and Bear wanted to go after it. Bear is a strong dog, and when he pulls on the leash, he pulls so hard he almost yanks my shoulder out of socket, and he's real good at calming down when I tell him to. We stopped to drink some water, and R checked the time. An hour and a half had gone by, and we decided to head back down the trail. As we were walking, we noticed that all the animals that we heard earlier had gone silent. And with me growing up being around nature, I knew that when the animals go silent, there's danger nearby. Bear could sense something was wrong, and he was now on alert. The eeriness of the silence and our footsteps was something from a horror movie. I even told R, I feel like we're in a horror movie. I feel like a monster is going to jump out, and then once we scream, a director is going to pop out and say, "Cut." Bear then stopped in his tracks and looked behind us and started growling. We turned around and we saw a man who looked like he was from the 1800s. He looked like he was attacked by an animal. He had 1800s style overalls on. Bear was growling and the hair was standing up on his back. R looked like she wanted to scream. I've never seen anyone as scared as she was. All the color drained from her face. R whispered, "You can see right through him." We finally noticed that he was floating. He started to float towards us and R yelled, "Run!" We took off like deer being chased by a predator. I let go of the leash so Bear wouldn't drag me, but he kept pace with us. R kept looking back, and the man was still chasing us, still floating. We were getting close to the bottom of the trail and we could see the car in the distance, and R yelled, "Don't stop running." We suddenly heard a man scream which hurt our ears. We got to the car and R dropped her keys on the ground. I looked back and the guy was almost down the trail. I yelled, "Hurry!" R quickly picked up her keys and unlocked the car. I swung the door open and Bear jumped into the back, and then I jumped in. R started the car and sped away as soon as the man was about to reach the car. I looked out the rear window and the man was gone. We were breathing heavy and Bear was panting hard. When we got back to my apartment, we sat in my living room and tried to find anything online to see if there was any deaths or disappearances on the trail. But we couldn't find anything, and we talked about it, and R said, "That's the first time I've seen a ghost. We haven't been to the trail since, and we don't plan on going back." Bear has grown more weary and cautious of men, and he's been having nightmares more and more. I'm not sure if the nightmares are about that day, but whenever he has a nightmare, I gently say his name to wake him up, and I tell him that it's okay, and I'll lay on the floor with him to comfort him. That was truly one of the most terrifying experiences of my life, and I'm just grateful that we were able to get out of there. R says the experience scared her so bad that whenever she goes to a clothing store and sees mannequins with display overalls on them, she thinks back to that day and gets goosebumps. She even has a hard time driving past woods. She says she's scared that she might see something similar come out of the woods, and she'll get the chills. My ex-boyfriend had something follow him home from his job at an Amazon warehouse. My ex and I broke up in 2018, but we remain on good terms. For privacy reasons, I will keep the location of the warehouse private. I will call my ex T for this story. He called me late last week and told me about some weird and scary things that had been happening at his house, like footsteps and knocks on the front door. I asked him to tell me when it started, and this is what followed, and it will be in his point of view. Earlier this week, as I was driving down the dirt road to get to work, I was in my own thoughts when I saw a deer leap into the road. I swerved around and I drove off the road a little bit and accidentally drove over a roadside grave. I didn't get out to inspect the grave as I was more worried about getting to work on time. After I got home that evening, the strange things started happening. I was sitting on the couch with Beans and Scoot watching TV while eating dinner. Suddenly the dogs lifted their heads up and I heard a knock on the door. So I answered it, but no one was there, so I closed the door, and as I turned around, I heard another knock. I then told myself that I wasn't getting enough sleep, so I called it a night and went to sleep with the dogs at the foot of my bed. The next day I had the day off, so I slept in until 10 a.m. After I woke up, I fed the dogs, and as I was cooking my food, I thought I heard footsteps go across my living floor. I turned around and saw that my dogs had lifted their heads to the noise. I looked all around the house but couldn't find no sign of anyone or anything, so I just convinced myself I was just hearing things, even though I know Beans and Scoot heard it. Later that day I decided to mow my yard, so I started up my riding lawnmower and began mowing. After finishing, I brought the lawnmower back to the shed. As I looked towards the driveway, I thought I saw a man walking to my porch. I then heard Beans and Scoot going crazy, so I booked it to the house, but when I got to the front porch there was no one there, and once again I searched the entire house and found no one. I know for sure I saw someone, and that my dogs saw someone, and I literally thought me and my dogs were going crazy. I didn't get that much sleep that night, and the day at work I was in the break room drinking some water. when I saw a man in the corner. He looked angry, and I saw that I was able to see through him. I closed my eyes, thinking he would not be there when I opened them. I suddenly felt a hand on my shoulder and my boss's voice saying, "T." I opened my eyes, and my boss asked if I was okay. I looked to the corner, and the man was gone. My boss said, "Look, T, you look very tired. Why don't you go home, take the next few days off and get some rest? I'll put you down for sick leave." So I drove home, and I fed my dog some dinner, and I ate a sandwich and went to sleep. I woke up about 4 hours later to Beans and Scoot barking like crazy. I woke up and saw a man in my hallway. The dogs were growling and snarling, but the man stood there. I was scared, and the hair on the dogs were standing up. I said in a shaky voice, "What do you want?" The man replied in a deep voice, "Road, grave." I suddenly remembered the roadside grave I had accidentally ran over. I put my shoes on, grabbed my keys, got the dogs in the car, and drove to the grave. I apologized, saying, "I'm sorry for disturbing your grave. I didn't do it on purpose. I'm truly sorry. Please leave me and my dogs alone." I drove back home, and nothing else has happened since. The dogs don't react to anything anymore, and I'm able to get to sleep at night. After he finished telling me the story, I told him, "Now do you believe in ghosts?" He said, "Yeah, I wish you could have experienced it." I replied, "Well, if I had a way to Texas, I would have came down there." T now says that he will pay attention to the road, and he stops by the grave every day and says a few words and puts a flower on the grave. I'm a 17-year-old girl who would babysit for a family I knew extremely well. My younger sister was friends with the little boy from the family. We'll call him Chris for privacy reasons. I absolutely adored Chris's younger sister, Lily, which is the main reason their mother had asked me to babysit for them. I was honestly excited, as I really enjoyed spending time with both kids. Their mom was going out to dinner with friends, and she wouldn't be home until much later in the night. The night of babysitting approached, and everything had been fine. I'd been playing some Minecraft with the two of them for quite a while, and later ordered a pizza for us all to share. Eventually 9 p.m. approached, and it was the kids' bedtime. The excitement must have wiped them out, because they didn't fight me at all. Once they were both asleep in their rooms, I sat on the couch in the living room and watched Netflix. For context, behind the living room is the staircase which leads to upstairs. So from where I was sitting, even though my back was facing it, I could see if someone was standing on the staircase. I was about halfway into an episode of my show when I then heard footsteps descending down the stairs. Assuming it was either Chris or Lily, I called out both of their names. No answer. Either I imagined it, or it was just one of them getting up to use the bathroom or something. I continued to watch my show until I saw something in the reflection of the grandfather clock. Right next to the TV, there was a faint outline of a little girl leaning over the railing of the stairs. I wasn't panicked at all initially, as I figured it was just Lily who had woken up. I turned from the couch to look at the stairs, only to be met with an empty staircase. There was nobody there. I whipped my head back around to face the grandfather clock, and the reflection was gone. I felt my stomach plummet, and my heartbeat started to spike. Unnerved, I paused the TV and looked back at the staircase. Nothing. Maybe the reflection had just been from the TV, and this was all in my head. That was the only plausible explanation. The only way I was going to find out for sure was if I checked both kids. Reluctantly, I got up and I walked up the staircase. I opened the door to Chris's room to find him sound asleep. I then made my way over to Lily's room, only to find her asleep as well. I walked further into her room just to double-check if she was really fully asleep, and she was. My heart still racing. I was just baffled. What the hell had I seen in the reflection if Lily was genuinely asleep? I turned to leave the room, only to stop dead in my tracks. There was a girl standing in the hallway, a girl who definitely wasn't Lily. She was sickeningly pale and wearing a white nightgown. I felt like my heart was going to come up my throat, frozen in fear. It took a few seconds to come back to reality, and then slam the door and lock it. My heart is pounding so fiercely, I feel like I'm going to puke. I just stood there, leaning against the door for a solid minute, heart racing and breathing heavy. That's when I then heard a knock on the door, and I jumped, screaming bloody murder. "Hey, it's just me," I heard Chris say from the other side of the door. Instant relief washed over me as I opened the door to see Chris. He just stood there, eyes wide, with this absolutely unnerved expression, clutching his little creeper stuffed animal. "What's wrong?" he asked me quietly. Lily had woken up as well, sitting up in bed with a confused expression. I didn't want to scare either of them, and little kids will panic if they see an adult actually freaked out. So I lied. "I was just watching a scary movie downstairs," I tell them. "When I came up to check on you guys, I guess I was just caught off guard. Sorry for waking you." They both went back to bed, and I returned back downstairs to try and become calm again. I resumed my TV show, and I was reaching the end when I suddenly had the urge to look in the reflection once again. Big mistake. I looked back only to see the clear face of a young girl, the one from the hallway, gaunt black eyes boring straight into me. Without another thought, I immediately sprung off the couch and sprinted up the stairs. I scooped Lily up out of bed and yanked Chris out of his. I fumbled for my car keys out of my bag, my hands shaking and my mind yelling a million different things at me. I booked it for my car. I don't even remember if I looked down the driveway before peeling out and speeding towards my home. Chris and Lily slept in the guest room in my house that night. I texted the mother that their house had lost power that night, so I had taken them to mine. My family was super close to theirs, so I didn't think it would be a big deal. When she came to pick them up, their mother asked me to babysit again, but I turned her down politely. It's not that I didn't like the kids. There was just no way in hell I was going to deal with that again. A few weeks later, my sister was invited for a play date with Chris. My parents, their mom, and I were all eating lunch together when Chris and Lily's mom brought up she was looking into moving. She started to complain hearing weird noises and seeing things by the staircase. Shock hit me like a bucket of cold water. Their mom continued on, explaining that she went to go do research on the house and had come across some unsettling things. During the 1920s, a family with 2 daughters lived there. Their youngest had died of pneumonia, and her bedroom was Lily's. Previous owners of the house had complained of the same things. I wasn't crazy, but I would be if I ever went back into that house again. This happened not too long ago at my dad's house in Charleston. It was about a month ago, and I was in my room. I couldn't sleep, so I just decided to watch TV. I've always had a weird feeling about my room at my dad's house because we have this small room behind a bookshelf that opened like a door. I've lived in that house since I was 7 years old, and I'm now 13, and I've never been scared of it before, even as a little kid. But for some reason, my room has been freaking me out. The creaking of the ceiling fan, the faint noise of the air vent that barely works. It just all seems scary to me. Anyway, as I was watching TV, I heard something coming from the bookshelf door, a faint tapping noise. I rewinded the show I was watching to see if it was the show. I didn't hear the tapping. Once I turned off the TV, I heard the tapping again. I just assumed it was my dog that sometimes wakes up in the middle of the night. Now, I'm not going to say the tapping didn't scare me. It definitely did. I tried to sleep, but the tapping started again, louder this time. "Scarlett, I know that's you," I yelled, thinking it was my little sister. The tapping stopped, and then I heard a voice at the door that sounded like my sister. "Macy, please, can I sleep in your room tonight? I can't sleep," the voice said. I knew it wasn't my sister. My sister wouldn't have started talking to me outside of my door like that voice did. The voice sounded like my sister, but something about it sounded almost inhuman. I didn't say anything. I didn't know exactly what to think of the voice. All I knew is that it wasn't my sister. I heard slow stomping as the thing at my door walked away. I locked my door and kept my lights on. I don't exactly know how I went to sleep after that, but I did. The night after, my dad and my little sister went to the store, so I was home alone. I was on the phone with my friend since I was scared that the thing would start talking again. After about an hour, she had to go, so I said goodbye and hung up reluctantly. I went downstairs to watch a movie with my dog. I didn't feel as scared since my dog is a 150-pound Great Dane. Halfway through the movie, I heard knocking at my front door. "Hello, I got locked out of my house. Can you please help me?" someone said in my neighbor's voice. I walked to the door and was about to open it when a thought popped into my mind. Wait, that's not my neighbor, she's out of town, I thought. I quickly backed away from the door and grabbed a knife from the kitchen in case whatever was outside my door got in. The knocking got faster and louder, and tears welled up in my eyes from fear. After what seemed forever, the knocking stopped and the thing walked away again. My dog was cowering in a corner instead of barking. My dad and my sister came home and we all went to sleep. After that night, I never heard the thing again. I'm still scared of my room to this day, but as long as I have my lamp on, I'm okay. I'll never forget that night. I work as a security guard for a branch of a big-name investment bank in Manhattan. My job's pretty routine since I work the night shift, when the bank is closed, and I've never had to deal with burglaries or people trying to get in at night. In fact, I'm not entirely sure why the bank needs a security guard at night, considering the place is already secured so well. I worked the day shift for about 6 months and was only recently transferred to work nights when the last guy, Mike, suddenly stopped showing up for work. I'm lucky to have procured this job as I have so many fewer responsibilities, yet I get paid the same amount. I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. and my job mainly consists of monitoring the 6 CCTV security monitors and occasionally walking through each floor, checking to make sure all doors are locked and nothing's out of the ordinary. Due to the simplicity of my job, I work alone, so initially it did feel a little eerie being in such a big building all by myself. But any sense of fear or tension was quickly replaced with boredom as I soon realized I had nothing to do. Most of my time is spent in the security control room where I sit in front of the monitors, kick my feet up on the desk, and read a Stephen King paperback. One night, while strolling through the first floor, I hear a long, drawn-out hiss that seems to be coming from the floor below me. Having never heard that sound before, I was perplexed and a little scared. I ran to the stairs and down one level to the basement. I got out my keys, found the right one, and unlocked the green metallic door with a big white B in the middle. I stepped through the door and immediately got sprayed with a thin layer of water. I instinctively jumped back and pulled out my X-26 taser gun to point at whatever was in front of me as I sputtered water from my lips and wiped it out of my eyes, to see that it was a burst pipe. I sighed with relief, convinced that I was going to need to apprehend an intruder, and holstered my taser. The burst pipe was approximately 30 inches to the left of the door, and the main valve was about 60 yards to the right of the door, so I jogged down the hallway in that direction to shut off the water supply in hopes of stopping the leak. I'm not sure what could have caused the pipe to burst. Perhaps it was just old and rusty and needed replacing, which wouldn't be a surprise considering the state of this place. The basement, compared to the rest of the building, could be a good setting for the next Saw movie. The lights always flickered, the paint on the walls was chipping, and I swear I've heard sounds of creatures skittering in and out of small cracks in the floor. It's what drives me to do whatever I can to stay the heck out of this place whenever I can. This is one of the few times I've actually had to come down here for any reason. There are some custodial and supply closets and other maintenance rooms down here that I was briefed about, but nothing that would require my attendance here. There's even one room with a big metal door that has a large radioactive warning sign on it that I was told specifically not to go into. Apparently, the room has high levels of radon gas, which results from the radioactive decay of uranium. No one really talks about that room, and unnecessary questions are discouraged by my superiors. Wanting to get out of here as quickly as possible, I pulled the lever of the main valve which turned off the water supply and headed back to the basement door to go up and log what happened. As I walked back, I was able to take in my surroundings in better detail. I walked another 3 feet and stopped dead in my tracks. The door with a radioactive sign on it, the one to the room I was told not to enter because it's full of radon, was cracked open. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. The feeling I felt could only best be described as what the people who looked into the eyes of Medusa must have felt a millisecond before turning to stone. I just knew that being within feet of that room with its door cracked was a life-altering event. I would have immediately rushed back to the security office and called my manager to report what I had just seen, if it weren't for the sound of distant conversations emanating from beyond the door. Shaking my head in confusion, I strained my ears to try and make out those sounds, praying I wasn't going crazy and hearing things. And there it was, a faint but present cacophony of voices with an occasional loud yell or banging. I was baffled since it sounded like this room was a lot bigger than I expected it to be, and because the voices sounded so far off. Instinct told me not to get any closer, but curiosity got the better of me, and I slowly walked over to the door to peer through the gap inside. What I saw wasn't a hollowed-out, dank basement room with miscellaneous objects strewn about and pipes running around the walls and ceiling. What I saw was a long, steep staircase descending further past what my vision could make out, lit up by long, thin, dim fluorescent lights spread out horizontally on the ceiling. The quality of the walls beyond the door were in stark contrast to those making up the rest of the basement, as they were covered in shimmering silver tiles, giving off a futuristic aurora. Still hearing the voices off in the distance and having seen the staircase, thoughts of radon exposure evaporated from my mind as the inquiring and skeptical part of me took over, wanting to find out what was going on here. I pried open the door a little and stepped through to the staircase. The voices from down below were a little louder now, and I began to hear what sounded like machines beeping and phones ringing. The confusion I felt temporarily overshadowed my fear of the situation I just walked into. Yet as I was about to take a step down the flight of stairs, I immediately was hit with the realization of what I was about to walk in on. This room clearly wasn't meant to be stumbled upon by a mere security guard, and the lengths the company went to keep people out of the basement, and specifically this room, made it clear that I shouldn't have been there. I also thought about Mike, who seemed to drop off the face of the earth when he stopped showing up to work, and I never heard from him again. Didn't he mention hearing strange noises from the basement during his night shift the week before I last saw him? What if what he saw downstairs scared him so much he got up and left, never to return? Or what if he never left at all, at least not of his own volition? I decided then and there that the best thing I could do is turn around, go back up to my security station, erase any footage of me entering this room, and act like this never happened, which is exactly what I did. Whatever was going on down there was never meant to be discovered by me, and no matter what fascinating discovery I'd come across by going downstairs, I valued my life more than satisfying my curiosity. I quit that job a week later, telling my employer I got another job offer closer to where my parents live since I needed to be around them due to health complications. Leaving was probably the safest option I could have made, not wanting any association with that bank ever again. I try not to think about what I would have seen if I went down those stairs, but to this day it still haunts me, and I hope that whoever or whatever was down there never catches up with me.